It was a quiet evening at Ridgeway Diner, one of those old-fashioned roadside places where the neon sign flickers and the jukebox plays soft country music. Chuck Norris walked in casually, wearing a simple jacket, faded jeans, and an old Marine-style cap that most people didn't even notice. He liked places like this, small, peaceful, where nobody cared about fame, titles, or who you used to be. Tonight, he just wanted a warm meal and a few minutes of silence. The waitress, a kind woman named Sarah, greeted him with a smile. "Coffee and the usual, sir?" Chuck nodded gently. "Thank you." He moved to a booth in the corner, away from the noise. He wasn't trying to hide. He was simply enjoying the calm. He picked up the menu, though he already knew what he wanted: steak, eggs, and black coffee. That's what he ordered every time. But the peace didn't last long. At the far end of the diner, a group of 5 men sat together, loud, aggressive, and clearly drunk. The locals called them the Ridgeway Crew, known more for trouble than anything productive. Their racist jokes echoed through the room, making the other customers uncomfortable. One of them, a tall guy with tattoos on his neck, spotted Chuck. He smirked. "Look at this old man sitting all alone," he whispered to his friend. "Probably scared to even look up." Another one laughed. "These old folks come here thinking they own the place." Chuck heard it, of course. He heard everything. But he didn't react. Conflict wasn't something he chased anymore. He had seen enough battles in life, both inside the ring and out in the world during his Marine service. He preferred peace whenever he could choose it. Sarah brought his coffee. "Don't mind them," she whispered nervously. "They get like this when they drink." Chuck nodded calmly, lifting his cup. "It's okay," he replied softly. "They're not my concern." But for the gang, silence was an invitation. They watched Chuck closely, mistaking his peaceful presence for fear. They didn't recognize him. They didn't know the calmness they saw wasn't weakness. It was discipline forged through years of training, combat, and character. And they had no idea the storm they were walking into. What happened next shocked everyone in that diner. The Ridgeway Crew didn't take long to escalate things. Their voices grew louder, their laughter harsher, and the more they looked at Chuck Norris sitting silently in his booth, the more their pride felt challenged. They couldn't stand that he wasn't reacting, not even giving them a glance. To insecure men, silence is more offensive than insults. The tallest one, the tattooed man named Riker, slammed his glass on the table loud enough to make Sarah flinch behind the counter. "Hey, old man," he shouted across the diner. "You deaf or something?" Chuck calmly cut another piece of steak. He didn't look up. His face remained neutral, relaxed, unbothered. He wasn't ignoring them to provoke them. He genuinely wasn't interested in conflict. But the gang misunderstood everything. Riker's friend, a bulky guy with greasy hair, squinted. "Yo, Riker, maybe he's scared," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Or maybe he doesn't speak English." A third member chimed in. "Or maybe he thinks he's too good to talk to people like us." Chuck set his fork down gently. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, not out of irritation, but out of politeness. He didn't want to spill food while he spoke. He finally lifted his eyes. Calm, controlled, completely fearless. "I'm just trying to eat," he said in a low voice. "Please leave me alone." The diner went silent for a moment. Sarah, behind the counter, froze with a coffee pot in her hand. An elderly couple by the window exchanged nervous glances. Even the jukebox song felt quieter. Riker laughed loudly, the kind of laugh meant to intimidate. "You hear that? He's asking us to leave him alone." He shoved his chair back and stood up, swaggering toward Chuck's booth like a wolf approaching prey. Sarah hurried forward. "Riker, please, don't start anything tonight," she pleaded. But Riker brushed her off. "Relax, Sarah. We're just having a chat with the grandpa here." 2 more gang members followed him, forming a loose semicircle around Chuck's booth. Chuck sat still, hands relaxed on the table, his breathing slow, his face unreadable. "Listen," Riker said, leaning over the booth. "We don't like strangers around here, especially ones who think they can sit quietly and ignore us." Chuck looked up at him slowly. "I'm not ignoring you," he replied calmly. "I'm respecting you by not responding." But to the gang, respect sounded like sarcasm. The greasy-haired man slapped Chuck's coffee cup, knocking it over. Hot coffee spilled across the table, dripping onto Chuck's jacket. Gasps filled the diner. Sarah covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" Chuck gently brushed the dripping coffee off his sleeve. No anger. No panic. Just controlled, almost meditative focus. A level of composure no ordinary man could maintain in a situation like this. Riker smirked. What's wrong, old man? You gonna cry? You gonna call someone? Chuck's eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but in assessment. These men weren't dangerous to him. They were dangerous to themselves. I don't want any trouble, he said peacefully. Too late, Riker snapped. The gang surrounded him fully now. Phones came out. Customers started recording. The tension in the air was thick, like the moment before a lightning strike. A young guy near the counter whispered to his friend, "Why isn't he fighting back? Anyone else would have swung by now." The friend shrugged. He looks like he can handle himself, but maybe he really is just a tired old man. They had no idea. Riker slammed his fist on the table again, rattling Chuck's plate. Stand up, he demanded. Show some respect. Chuck tilted his head slowly. Respect, he repeated, is earned, not screamed. That sentence hit the gang harder than any punch. Riker grabbed the front of Chuck's jacket. Sarah screamed, "Stop, please." The entire diner stood up, some backing away, others filming, some frozen in fear. Chuck looked straight into Riker's eyes. Calm. Still. Unshakable. Last warning, Chuck said quietly. Walk away. Riker shoved him. The gang laughed, expecting movement, panic, maybe fear. But Chuck didn't move an inch. Not even one step. The gang suddenly paused. Something felt off. Something felt wrong. You can sense true danger without seeing it. Your body knows before your mind does. And for the first time that night, Riker felt a chill run down his spine. Chuck stood up slowly. Not aggressively. Not quickly. Just purposefully. Like a man who had stood up 1,000 times in front of real threats. He wasn't just tall, he was solid, balanced. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, silently powerful. A voice from the back whispered, "Who is this guy?" Chuck looked at the gang, his tone firm yet calm. "I gave you a chance to walk away." The diner held its breath. Something big was coming. Something none of them were prepared for. Have you ever seen someone abused or bullied like this? Comment below which country or city you're watching from. The diner felt like it had fallen into a vacuum. No sound, no movement, just the heavy weight of anticipation pressing on everyone's chest. Chuck Norris stood there, calm as ever, while the racist gang glared at him, their confidence beginning to crack at the edges. Riker tried to force a grin, but the nerves showed in his eyes. He wasn't expecting Chuck to stand up so steadily. The man's posture wasn't that of an old, fragile diner guest. It was the posture of someone trained, disciplined, dangerous if pushed too far. But ego doesn't listen to fear. Ego listens only to pride. Riker stepped closer. You think standing up makes you tough? He sneered. You think you're better than us? Chuck shook his head slowly. I don't think I'm better. I'm just not afraid. A ripple shot through the diner. Not afraid? Who says something like that while surrounded by 5 aggressive men? Riker's friend, the bulky guy with greasy hair, barked, Man, this dude's crazy. Let's just shut him up already. A third member cracked his knuckles, stepping around Chuck as if preparing to block every exit. They were tightening their circle. Chuck looked around, assessing their positions, not nervously, but tactically. Years of Marine training were etched into his bones. Every stance, every angle, every twitch of a hand meant something to him. He spoke quietly. You're making a mistake you don't need to make. Riker scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. Yeah? And what mistake is that? Chuck held his gaze. Picking a fight you can't win. The gang laughed again, but this time the laughter had a strange, hollow quality. The customers watching noticed it. The cameras recording the scene captured the moment you could see fear beginning to seep into their bravado. Sarah grabbed her phone under the counter, trembling. She didn't know whether to call the police or hope Chuck defused the situation. Please, Chuck, she whispered under her breath. Don't get hurt. Don't hurt them. But the gang didn't back off. Pride wouldn't let them. Riker shoved Chuck again, harder this time. Chuck didn't stumble. He didn't even blink. Move him, Riker barked to his friends. 2 gang members stepped forward and tried to grab Chuck's arms. Bad mistake. Chuck shifted his weight slightly. A tiny movement. Barely noticeable. But it was enough. The 2 men's grips loosened instantly. Their faces changed. They had felt something under their fingers. Not muscle steel. Chuck hadn't even fought yet, and they already felt something was wrong. Yo, Riker, one whispered nervously, this guy's built. Shut up, Riker snapped. The 4th gang member, The one holding a pool cue he had grabbed from the corner, tapped it against his hand and muttered, "Let's just finish this." Chuck took a slow breath. Deep. Controlled. A breath that said he was choosing patience over violence. "I'm warning you," he said softly. "Not for my sake, but for yours." The entire diner listened. The jukebox flicked to the next song, but nobody noticed. All eyes were on the old man who refused to show fear. Riker leaned inches from Chuck's face. "You're in our diner. Our town. And we don't let old strangers disrespect us." Chuck replied gently, with a calm that made Riker's anger look childish. "I haven't disrespected anyone. I'm just trying to eat." "Too bad," Riker hissed. "We're not done with you." He raised his fist. The moment felt slow motion. Customers gasped. Sarah screamed. Phones shook as people zoomed in. People whispered prayers. Chuck's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in decision. He wasn't going to hit first. He never did. But he would protect himself. The fist came closer. And closer. Then, a voice from a booth shouted, "Stop." Everyone turned. It was an older man, maybe in his 70s, trembling but brave. "Leave him alone," he yelled. "You boys don't know what you're doing." Riker laughed. "Sit down, Grandpa, before we give you a heart attack." But something about the old man's words put a crack in their confidence. "You don't know what you're doing." It echoed in their heads. Another customer whispered, "That guy's not normal. Look at him. He's too calm. Too controlled." A teenager recording murmured, "He moves like a soldier, bro. Watch his stance." Now the gang felt it. Not fear of Chuck, but fear of the unknown. Fear of the man who wasn't acting like a victim. Fear of the man who didn't respond like a civilian. Riker finally snapped and pushed forward again. Chuck exhaled slowly. He shifted his feet. He raised his hands, not in a fighting stance, but in a peaceful open palms gesture. "I don't want to hurt you," he said softly. The diner froze. It was the kind of sentence only a trained professional would say with that tone. Calm, confident, absolutely certain. Riker looked at his friends. His friends looked at him. Doubt crept in, but pride pushed it down. And so they stepped closer. Too close. Too close to realize they were about to cross a line they would regret for the rest of their lives. If you were standing there in that diner, what would you do? Tell me in the comments below. The moment everything changed. The diner felt heavier now, like the air itself had turned into thick smoke. Everyone inside sensed something was shifting, an invisible pressure building. Chuck Norris remained seated, calm, steady, watching the gang leader with the same quiet eyes that had once stared down enemies overseas. But the gang didn't know that. They only saw a man with wrinkles, gray hair, and calm posture, mistaking calmness for weakness. A dangerous mistake. The leader slammed his fist on Chuck's table again. "Stand up, old man. I'm done waiting." Chuck didn't flinch, not even a blink. Instead, he slowly lifted his cup and took another sip of coffee. The sound of the cup gently touching the table echoed louder than the gang leader's threats. That tiny moment, that tiny act of not being intimidated, agitated the gang more than any punch could. At the counter, Nancy whispered, her voice trembling, "Someone stop this, please." But no one moved. No one wanted to be caught between a racist gang and the quiet man they assumed was helpless. The leader grabbed Chuck by the collar. "I said stand up." Chuck gently removed the man's hand, not with anger, but with precision, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "I'll stand," Chuck said, "when you stop trying to bark like a scared dog." The entire diner gasped. The gang leader froze. He wasn't expecting that. "What did you just say?" The leader snarled. Chuck finally rose to his feet. He wasn't big. He wasn't towering. But when he stood, the room felt smaller, like gravity shifted around him. "Son," Chuck said calmly, "I've dealt with men 10 times tougher than you," and they had the sense to walk away. The gang members exchanged confused glances. Something felt wrong. This wasn't the voice of an ordinary old man. There was too much discipline in it. Too much control. For the first time since the confrontation began, uncertainty crept onto the gang leader's face. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Chuck didn't answer. He didn't have to, because someone else did. From the far corner of the diner, a middle-aged trucker slowly stood up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Oh my God," he whispered. That's Chuck Norris." The room fell into a stunned silence. A teenager at a table near the window quickly pulled out his phone and zoomed in. "No way, it is him. That's Chuck Norris. The Marine. The martial artist." The guy who fought in the special forces. The whispers spread like wildfire. That's him, Chuck Norris. The Chuck Norris? Oh, these idiots messed up. The gang members stiffened. The leader swallowed hard, trying to hide the sudden panic flickering in his eyes. He forced a laugh, a nervous one. That's not Chuck Norris. Come on, this is just some washed up. He is, the trucker interrupted sharply. I saw him in Iraq. I saw him train Marines. The man standing in front of you has more combat time than all of you put together. The gang suddenly looked less like predators and more like cornered animals. Chuck sighed. He never liked being recognized in situations like this. Fame didn't matter to him. Glory didn't matter. Respect mattered. Fairness mattered. And right now, these thugs were learning both the hard and humiliating way. The leader tried to regain control. I don't care who he is. He's in our territory. Chuck stepped closer, so close the gang leader's bravado cracked like thin ice. Your territory? Chuck said softly. Son, America doesn't belong to bullies. The leader's jaw locked. And it sure as hell doesn't belong, Chuck continued, to cowards who pick on innocent people because they're scared of their own emptiness. The words hit harder than any punch. The customers watched in awe. The tension wasn't just rising now, it was transforming. Chuck wasn't simply standing up for himself. He was standing up for everyone the gang had ever terrorized. The gang members shifted uncomfortably. One whispered to another, maybe we picked the wrong guy. Another, bro, that's really him. Look at his stance, that's military. The leader forced a smirk, but it shook at the edges. All right, old man. So you're Chuck Norris. So what? You think that scares me? Chuck raised an eyebrow. No, but your lack of sense does. The gang erupted with insults, trying to get their confidence back, but the power dynamic had already flipped. The room, once filled with fear, was now lit with a strange, electric anticipation. Chuck didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He didn't threaten. He simply said, walk away, all of you, before you do something you'll regret for the rest of your lives. It wasn't a warning. It was mercy. And the gang leader, shaking with anger, shame, and fear, realized something. This wasn't a man he could intimidate. This wasn't a man he could beat. This wasn't a man he should have ever touched. But his pride, his ego, his need to look tough in front of his gang, wouldn't let him walk away. He took one step forward. And that was the moment the diner collectively felt. The diner felt like it was holding its breath. Every eye was glued to the tense scene at the corner booth. Chuck Norris, calm as ever, faced the gang with a quiet confidence that made even the loudest of them hesitate. For a few moments, the world seemed to have slowed. The only sounds were the soft hum of the neon sign outside and the faint sizzle from the kitchen. Riker, the gang leader, puffed out his chest. So you're Chuck Norris, former Marine. Huh? Big deal. I'm not scared of some old man with stories. His voice cracked slightly despite the bravado. Chuck didn't flinch. He took a slow, deliberate breath and lifted his hands slightly, not in aggression, but in readiness. Every muscle was coiled and controlled, every movement precise. Years of combat training, Marine discipline, and real-life experience radiated from him like an invisible shield. I don't want to fight, Chuck said, voice calm but commanding. I gave you every chance to walk away, but you chose aggression. Now I'm only going to do what's necessary to stop it. The words cut deeper than any insult. The gang's laughter faltered. They could feel the danger now, even if they didn't fully understand it. This was a man who had fought wars, trained soldiers, and survived situations far worse than their empty threats. Riker lunged, attempting a wild punch at Chuck's face. But Chuck's reflexes were instantaneous. With a subtle shift of his weight, he sidestepped and used the gang member's momentum against him. The man stumbled forward and crashed into a chair, crashing it to the floor. Gasps filled the diner. Sarah, the waitress, ducked behind the counter, clutching her apron. A few customers had their phones out, filming every move. Chuck remained calm. No shouting, no flailing, no anger, just precise control. You're fast, one gang member stammered, trying to recover his composure. Faster than ignorance, Chuck replied quietly. Another member swung a pool cue at Chuck. In one smooth motion, Chuck blocked it with his forearm, twisting the attacker's arm behind his back without causing serious harm. The gang's eyes widened. They had no idea how to handle someone like this. Chuck moved like water. Each strike, each block, each shift was calculated. He neutralized the gang's attacks without overexerting himself. By the time he was done, every member of the gang was off balance, shaken, and humiliated. They weren't injured badly, but their confidence, their sense of control, had been shattered. Then Chuck paused. He could end it, really end it, but he didn't. He wanted to teach them a lesson about respect, not to crush them out of anger. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice calm but firm. Violence is a choice. But so is mercy. You chose aggression. I chose to stop it, without turning it into something worse. Learn this. Respect is earned, not demanded. The words hung in the diner like a heavy curtain. Every customer felt it. Every gang member felt it. The man who had walked in quietly, expecting to intimidate and mock, now had nothing but shame and fear staring back at him. Riker's voice cracked as he tried to regain authority. This isn't over. Chuck shook his head slowly. It is over, if you're willing to learn. The gang's eyes darted around the diner. Some were watching Chuck in awe. Others scanned the customers, now realizing they had no allies here. They were just a group of loud, aggressive men who had picked the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. At that moment, a man in the corner whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. That's Chuck Norris, a former Marine, for God's sake. You guys have no idea who you're dealing with. The gang froze. Panic began to replace their arrogance. Chuck's controlled demeanor, his skill, and now his reputation created a force field of authority that couldn't be ignored. Chuck looked at each of them calmly. You can leave. Or you can stay and learn the hard way. The choice is yours. Silence. Then, slowly, one by one, the gang began backing away. Their eyes no longer showed defiance. They showed recognition of a power far beyond their own. By the time they reached the door, the diner was quiet except for the soft clinking of cups and forks. Chuck returned to his booth, wiped a stray drop of coffee from his jacket, and sat down. His calm was unshaken. His meal, now slightly cold, would still be eaten. Every customer, every witness, felt something in that moment. They had just seen restraint, discipline, and morality in motion. Chuck Norris had not just defended himself. He had taught a lesson about courage, control, and respect. And the diner would never forget it. Have you ever seen someone face aggression with this level of calm and strength? Comment below how you would handle it. The diner had gone silent. The gang, once brash and cocky, now stood frozen in place. Their confidence had evaporated like smoke, leaving only a heavy sense of shame and disbelief. Chuck Norris sat back down at his booth, calm, collected, as though nothing had happened, though the aura around him radiated a quiet authority that could crush mountains. It was then that recognition finally spread through the room. A middle-aged man sitting at the counter, who had been quietly sipping coffee, leaned forward with eyes wide. His voice, trembling with excitement, cut through the tension. Wait a minute, that's Chuck Norris, the former Marine, the martial arts legend. The words traveled like wildfire. One customer whispered to another, "Did he just say Chuck Norris?" Another said, "No way, the guy from all those movies, the Marine, the legend?" A teenager recording the scene on his phone shouted, "Guys, this is not a drill. That's the Chuck Norris." The gang froze completely. Their bravado evaporated as the full weight of the situation hit them. They weren't just facing an ordinary diner patron. They had just challenged a living legend, a man whose reputation alone could terrify hardened criminals. Riker, the gang leader, tried to force a laugh, but it was hollow and quivering. "No, this can't be real. He's just an old guy." Chuck shook his head slowly, almost with pity. "You really don't understand, do you? You thought you could intimidate me. You thought I was weak. But here's the truth. Real strength isn't about size or noise. It's about discipline, control, and respect." One of the gang members gulped audibly. He glanced at the others, eyes wide. We messed up. Big time." Chuck stood up once more, his posture perfectly controlled, exuding calm authority. "I've given you every chance to learn tonight. You had every opportunity to leave with your dignity intact. But instead, you chose aggression. Now you're humiliated because of your own actions." The gang leader tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. Chuck's calm demeanor, his Marine-trained precision, and the absolute moral clarity behind his words left no room for excuses. From the back of the diner, a waitress gasped, "Oh my God! He didn't even hit them hard. But they're terrified." Chuck didn't smile, but his eyes conveyed a quiet truth. Real power doesn't need to shout. Real courage doesn't need to strike first. Real justice doesn't need vengeance. The gang's faces went pale. Their earlier arrogance had dissolved into shame. One member muttered, I didn't know. I didn't know who he was. Chuck stepped closer, voice low but firm. Next time, pick respect. Don't let your fear, your anger, your ignorance lead you to make a fool of yourselves. You've learned the hard way tonight, but I'm giving you a chance to leave alive, and with some lesson in humility. The gang didn't argue. They didn't protest. They shuffled out of the diner one by one, defeated not by fists or weapons, but by a calm, disciplined, moral force they had underestimated entirely. Outside, a few patrons who had filmed the confrontation started clapping. Some cheered. A young man said, That was unbelievable. He didn't even raise his voice, and they all froze. Chuck returned to his booth and quietly finished his meal. He didn't gloat. He didn't flaunt his victory. He simply ate, calm and humble, demonstrating that true power is restraint, not showmanship. The trucker from the counter shook his head in amazement. I've seen war. I've seen fights. But this is something else. That man is a legend in every sense of the word. A teenage girl filming the scene whispered to her friend, The internet is gonna explode. Everyone needs to see this. The scene had gone from chaotic intimidation to a lesson in humility, respect, and courage. The gang had been humiliated, but more importantly, the diners, and soon, the world, witnessed the kind of strength that comes from character, discipline, and moral integrity. How would you react if you realized you disrespected a Marine legend? Comment below and tell us what you would do. The Ridgeway Diner had returned to a quiet hum, but the energy in the air had changed forever. Chuck Norris sat back down, unshaken, sipping the last of his coffee as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The gang, humiliated and thoroughly shaken, had fled, leaving behind shattered pride and a newfound understanding of humility. But outside, word of the confrontation had already begun to spread. Patrons who had filmed the entire event uploaded their videos to social media. Within minutes, the footage of Chuck calmly facing the aggressive gang and neutralizing them without unnecessary violence began circulating across platforms. Comments flooded in. Absolute legend. Discipline over anger every time. This is what respect looks like. The story didn't stay local for long. News outlets picked it up, sharing the footage with headlines like, Chuck Norris stops racist gang with calm discipline at local diner. Former Marine teaches lesson in respect and humility. Within hours, millions around the world were watching, sharing, and commenting. People were inspired, amazed, and in awe of Chuck's restraint and moral clarity. Parents shared it with their children. Martial artists praised the technique and control. Veterans admired the discipline. Meanwhile, authorities had begun investigating the incident. The gang, already humiliated in the diner, now faced formal consequences for assault, harassment, and hate-based intimidation. The legal system, in its own way, validated what Chuck had demonstrated physically and morally. Aggression and prejudice carry consequences. Yet Chuck didn't see any of this as victory. He hadn't wanted attention. He hadn't wanted fame. All he wanted was to prevent injustice, to stand calmly for what was right, and to show that real strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about holding yourself accountable, even under pressure. A local reporter approached him cautiously. Mr. Norris, what do you want people to learn from what happened tonight? Chuck looked around at the diner, at the customers who had witnessed everything, at the gang that had fled in shame. His voice was soft, but carried unmistakable authority. Respect and discipline aren't earned by fear. They're earned by actions, integrity, and the choices you make when no one is watching. Anyone can fight, but controlling yourself? That's power. His words resonated across the crowd, and across the millions now watching online. The story became a global symbol of courage, humility, and moral strength. People debated, discussed, and reflected. How often had they judged others hastily? How often had they allowed arrogance or prejudice to guide their actions? Chuck's simple, calm demonstration reminded everyone that strength isn't shown by intimidation or aggression. It's shown by the ability to remain composed, to act with principle, and to teach lessons without cruelty. The diner staff, still trembling but smiling, watched as Chuck finished his meal. He tipped his hat, thanked them quietly, and walked out into the cool night. Outside, a small crowd that had gathered clapped and cheered. He nodded politely, but didn't speak. His actions, not words, had delivered the message. And the message went viral. Within days, hashtags like hashtag respect over fear, hashtag Chuck Norris discipline, and hashtag power of restraint trended worldwide. Millions commented, sharing their own experiences of standing up to injustice or witnessing acts of courage. Parents, veterans, students, and martial artists all found inspiration in the story. Chuck Norris had not sought fame that night, but the world couldn't ignore the lesson he imparted. Dignity, discipline, and respect outweigh aggression every time. If you believe no one should be judged by appearance or threatened without reason, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. The story of the diner would be remembered for years, not for the aggression of the gang, but for the calm, disciplined courage of one man who stood up for what was right without losing his own integrity.